Hello, everybody. Welcome to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, February 4th. Holland Squallen plus Tuktumut plus Squamish Okmel. As always, we're gathered to do our work today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. Can I have someone move adoption of the agenda, please? Moved by Councillor Hamilton, second by Councillor Greenlaw. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Please be advised that this council meeting is being live streamed, recorded, and will be available to the public to view on the District of Squamish's website following the meeting. If you have concerns, please notify the corporate officer present at the meeting. We will move on to item 3.1, which is staff reports. And this is regarding the 2025 to 2029 financial plan process or the budget debrief. So I will turn it over to staff to run us through the presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Heather Boxer, General Manager of Financial IT and Procurement Services. I am joined here today by Ms. Glenday, CAO, as well as Laura Turner, who is our Director of Financial Planning and Reporting, who is online today. And she has a brief presentation to guide us through today's meeting. However, we're just really here to open it up to Council to hear feedback and have a debrief on the financial planning process that we just completed. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ms. Turner.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Laura Turner, Director of Financial Planning and Reporting, and we're here today seeking feedback on the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. The financial planning process started with a budget kickoff October 1st, followed by weekly budget workshops throughout October as outlined on this slide. Public engagement events were held in November with final adoption of the financial plan bylaw on December 17th. A few highlights and improvements made this year include a community priorities survey in the spring of 2024, a condensed schedule of weekly budget workshops throughout October, a new searchable project budget tool for council, the new budget book online platform, the budget open house, which was held at Brennan Park Recreation Center this year, and the digital budget presentations were made available to the public. As staff are keen to continuously improve process, we're posing the following questions for discussion and feedback today. First, what can the district do in the 2026 to 2030 financial plan cycle to streamline staff and council processes and be more effective with council workshop time and staff capacity? And second, what financial processes were effective in the 2025 to 2029 process? And with those questions in mind, I'll turn it back to Mayor and Council for discussion.
Thank you very much. So Council, who wants to kick us off here? Councillor Hamilton.
Hi there. I think the 2024, 25, 26, I'm getting my years mixed up here because that was the 25 financial planning happening in 2024. I think that process, as I've seen this evolve in my short time on council, I can certainly see improvements being made, particularly the availability of the budget book. I think that's been a significant improvement in our ability to communicate our budget numbers to the community. And I hope we can continue to evolve that so that we can communicate even more clearly with our community. One example, a small example of what I found last year, we did a great job of putting together, grouping our budgets into categories and departments. And then if a community member wanted to see everything that came into that piece of budget, you could download a multi-page PDF file, which was fantastic to have all the details, but I think potentially a little bit over all the information was there, but not very easily readable because 100 projects spread over 100 different PDF files can be difficult to read. And so I think maybe I'd be interested in seeing if we could work towards having the information that we do disseminate more digestible by the community. by doing things like searchable, sortable digital files that our community can interface with more easily than looking through a large number of PDF files. I was really happy to see that searchable feature for council. That was a very effective piece. It really helped me understand the budget and understand what pieces we needed to work on. So thanks. I'll leave it there for now, just in case there's anybody else. I have a few other things. But...
Okay, thank you for that. Other comments at this point? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor Herford. I thought that Brennan Park Recreation Center worked well. Second attempt at that meeting. It's really unfortunate the night the power outage, the first attempt, that the backup energy system didn't immediately restore power to the building that night. That's a whole other issue. And I'm going to take this opportunity to share that process-wise, I think for the most part, everything worked and was one of the better processes in the 6 years that I've been doing this. However, the projected increase of 12.87% in property tax revenue needed for the 2026 budget year is unsupportable. I've had conversations with property taxpayers regularly about this in the last little bit, and I'd like for us to do everything we can as a council to pull that percentage down to 8 or less. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
In the staff report, it mentions that we are also planning on doing a citizen satisfaction survey this year. I'm going to ask some questions before I make comment. As I reflect on what we can do differently, I think a big piece for me is how do we get that information early from our community on what is supportable going forward. I want to fully recognize that I was on maternity leave when we did the early parts of the budget, and I joined for some of the components, and so I don't have the most fulsome perspective from last year's budget, but I am curious what the timeline is for the citizen satisfaction survey, and if that's something that we can also dovetail with some budget questions. In particular, I'm curious about trying to get feedback from our community on these trade-offs. So there are things and expectations of what our government is going to deliver. Are folks willing to receive a decrease in services? Are they willing to pay more in taxes? Do they want to pay higher fees? Like, how do we engage in this conversation about the trade-offs going forward? That's a big question, sorry.
Good morning, Christina Moore, Director of Communications. Thank you for the question, Councillor Stoner. And through the chair, I can confirm the timing for the citizen satisfaction survey will be well in line with the budget process. We currently have a schedule to present the results to council in mid-April. So the questions are being developed as we speak. And that's great feedback to bring in some of the thoughts and ideas that council has regarding some of the questions we can ask. We're working with a company that has facilitated a number of community satisfaction surveys across British Columbia, and there is quite a large sort of standard pool of questions that can help us gather data that will support council decision making on a wide variety of areas. And so we're working through that process right now, and we do plan to share the questionnaire with council prior to it being shared with the community. And yeah, results are expected to be available by mid-April, so we'll inform this budget process.
That's a really helpful piece of information. Is that going to be an opinion survey or like a like, are we mailing that out to make a statistical survey?
Through the chair, we are going to mail this survey out. We have hired a survey research company to help us. Typically, our surveys are based on self-selection through our website, through our Let's Talk Squamish
platform and shared through social media. This one will be as well, but we will have a statistically valid result based on an accurate sample. The expectation, the company that we're working with, when we went through the RFP process, we received a number of methods for data collection. This particular survey company that we are working with had quite a high response rate, the highest response rate that we saw through the RFP process, which was in the range of about 20 to 25% of respondents. So the plan is to mail 1,800 surveys to get the statistically valid response back.
Thank you. And sorry to take us off track. It's related, but not. So I don't want to totally overburden the citizen satisfaction survey with budget components, but I do think that'll be an important piece to inform. And then I think what processes can be more effective with the council workshop time and staff capacity, I think getting the information from our community early about what those trade-offs are that they're willing to make to help inform our discussion and our deliberations then in October. Like, I actually think that our workshops in October were actually, I think, quite concise and effective. I think the piece that I felt like I was missing was ground truthing with our community early on what was reasonable going forward. As comments, the city of Cranbrook last year did a really extensive survey on their budget, going into budget, as well as the RMOW and the city of Vancouver are ones that I've been looking at recently that have some really fascinating, just like framing of questions of like how you kind of do this trade-off of what folks are willing to do.
Thank you. Other comments? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, a few have tried to pull out of the feedback I had, more in-depth feedback I had from some of the engagements we did, but a few things that bubble up. One, I think we still need to reinforce or remind or try and explain what local government does and doesn't do and how taxation works and what our constraints and so on are. A lot of questions and misunderstanding around those things still, and that'll probably just always be the case. I do want to be a little bit cautious, and I have raised, some flags myself about next year's numbers, but focusing too much or allowing the conversation to be too much about a single sort of final number, I think is really challenging. There's a lot of important context because we have had, it matters that percentage increase. What were the years before? And we've had much lower increases, and so that number is not the same as a 12% increase in other places where they've had 10% increases over the years. And so having that conversation with people is challenging, but it's actually really important. And so we need to be, I think, cautious about focusing too much on a single final all encapsulating number because it doesn't really encapsulate everything. One of the things we often say is that every discussion is a budget discussion. And I guess the converse of that is every budget discussion is a discussion about priorities. And one of the things that really jumped out at me came from a few conversations I had at the wellness fair where some of the folks, when they're asking why we were there and mentioned budget, they were immediately intimidated and didn't feel confident or comfortable having a budget discussion. I think they would have been, my sense is, very comfortable talking about priorities and how they feel about things. But as soon as they heard this idea about finances and numbers, they just felt this wasn't a conversation for them. And so I think as we think about how we present the information to people, that's a really important piece. A lot of people do not feel comfortable talking about budgets and don't feel, quite frankly, I think they probably could have those discussions, but they don't feel comfortable having them. I think, we had great boards at Brennan Park, but for some of the council with a coffee with council and the wellness fair and so on, we didn't have as many of the boards and that sort of offline information. And I think that is really critical for people to understand and have context. A lot of people at some of these things, they hadn't seen any of the budget information. And so it was hard for them to have a conversation because they were, they didn't have that background. I think, some of the AAP stuff and the transportation master planning boards we had also were, I think, a really good example of some of the information that, especially the AAP, some of the really graphical, cartoonish sort of, the parts of the city. I think people, my sense is, really resonated with those and helped them really understand how all these things fit together. So I think it's meeting people where they are and making sure they have the information. Don't assume they've gone to the website and have read before they've come to talk to us, because a lot of them, they're coming to actually learn about the budget and not just tell us what they think. So overall, I think it's, seeing great improvement in our process, and just, a few things to tweak going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I'll start out with a couple of questions, although my first one begins with an observation from a recent library board meeting where we were discussing facilities planning and what's going on in other communities, and surveying, public surveys being done in other communities. And there's a bit of a consistent pattern, something that we recognize in Squamish, is that we have issues like a second sheet of ice or an expanded pool that dominate in hierarchy of public priorities in the end, if we crunch the numbers. And items like the library don't fare well along with other cultural or some recreational seniors programs. So there's some miscellaneous things that maybe aren't miscellaneous, but they end up at the bottom in prioritizing in public surveys. And my question arising from that is, we can recognize this populist, if you like, natural phenomenon of ranking and prioritizing in public surveys. But will our citizen satisfaction survey take into account that there are organizations out in the community who represent a large number of citizens and concerns and issues and programs? Would they be brought in as participants or eligible participants in a citizen satisfaction survey? People like the Chamber or a recreational or a cultural group that represent quite a number of citizens. Is that something to take into consideration?
Through the chair. So the citizen satisfaction survey, so the goal of the survey itself is to sample a cross-section of the community, individual residents. And there is a budget to this project that was approved in the, was previously approved. So it allows us to bring in a research company to support our efforts in this case. So the survey, so we'll end up with two kind of buckets of data. One will be the statistically accurate representative of the community's feedback, which will be based on individual responses. The second bucket of information will be something more similar to what we currently do, and that would be having the survey open to the general public, any of the recreation groups and organizations in the community to fill out. So we can compare the data from the sample to the broader community open survey and see where that nets out.
Thank you very much. My second question concerns, it mostly relates to special projects in the budget package. Some questions from my fellow councillors and myself concerned carryover situations or projects. On my part, I asked a few questions about projects that were no longer there. I had to go back and research it from past budgets to track what happened to it, and got some interesting responses and explanations from our staff. My question is there a way that we can better highlight what projects have been dropped, whether it's funding or reprioritizing, and perhaps that might we can also include the carryover of budget carryover into the next year. Is there a way that we might be able to summarize that information? I'm not sure how difficult, maybe department by department, but I can name a couple of the projects. They generally fit under the community development and economic development area. Is there a better way to highlight that information that's not going to be present in the current selection of line items for the next 5 years?
Thank you for the question through the mayor. We certainly can take that away. That is great feedback. We have attempted to do so in previous years, and we were limited this year in terms of really highlighting what has changed year over year. Our current process is that the carry forward comes in this first quarter from the previous year to amend the 25 to 29 financial plan. But certainly going into the next year is to really highlight what has changed, and if there's anything that's changed between those 2 points, we can certainly take a look at and come up with a process that is a bit more clear. Thank you.
Thank you. It might alleviate some research on the part of councillors, but it also is an opportunity for discussion as to the nature of these changes and decisions made on the part of staff.
Hold on one second. I just had I have a question on this point, and I think Councillor Stoner does as well. My question is, when you're talking about, we have a clear process for the carryover financially, which happens at the end because we need to, and we know that, the spring amendment. Are you talking? I just want to make sure that that I understand what you're looking for here. When we do our quarterly reports, we get the pieces that have started and the progress that's seen, and the budget isn't a standalone. So these things all kind of fit together. So do you mean things that have dropped off from like year 2, 3, and so on in the budget as things evolve, or are you speaking about the pieces that work that was meant to happen in like year 1 of the financial process? Also make sure that we're looking for the right piece in the right spot.
Thank you, Mayor Herford. I can give a couple of examples that may help. First of all, for what I refer to as carryover situations, there was a project approved 2 years ago, a $90,000 line item for repair and restoration. And we haven't had a project report on this, and it wasn't in the this year's package. So the question would be, what's happened to that project? What's its status? And that's really what I'm looking for, is a catch up on something that no longer appears as a line item. Presumably it's out there, or isn't it? But there was that allocation. I'm assuming it's carried over from the budget. In fact, 2 budget cycles or years ago. The other example I'll offer is heritage context statements. In last year's package was proposed for 3 years of funding, $10,000 a year, starting, I believe, next year, 2026. And that was removed, and I asked about that, had to research it, asked about it, and Mr. Velenissis gave an account of the decision made by staff regarding that item. So those are 2 situations, a project that's no longer being considered by staff, and the other one is a project that we haven't got an update on, and there's no status in the present package. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Stoner? Okay. Anyone else before I venture some of my own? No. Oh, do you have another? Sorry, I cut your comments there to get that clarity. Go ahead. You have additional.
Unless Councillor Stoner wanted to comment on a particular item, I have a couple more comments, really. Firstly, the budget book. I never used it. I never went into it, and I hope that the public found it useful. I don't have any feedback to offer, and I just thought maybe that's of significance to let you know. I never needed it. I have my own kind of old school ways, and but just so but I am curious as to what the public to how they received that new tool. I found at the open house 2 items to bring up regarding the open house. I found myself taking the members of the public to the binder stands and showing them things. And one, that's the extra level of detail. And you need to work with the citizen in how to interpret, where do you find, what pages are we looking for. But because there were some questions that came up from the board, from the information boards, economic development and community development as a part of the pie, if you like. Economic development is quite small, and that's a bit confusing to folks. So I had to take them to the binder and told them, well, you got 2 pages of line items here. These are the ones for economic development. All this vast number of projects here are community development. So there is some, I found the information boards to be better year by year. We do a better job year by year. But sometimes there's you need to be on hand to take the member of the public to the binder book and go to that next level of detail. The other comment I'd like to make about the budget open house, I do recognize there are a larger number of conversations with residents. However, and some of my colleagues may recall, there were 2 or 3 people there who had a mission to come and tell us, and they had about the tax level in particular, And they would not have written down a comment unless they were coaxed to. They were there for the opportunity of a town hall setting. That's why they were there. And I think that we shouldn't overlook that there are people that need or would expect that opportunity and would need some coaxing to find another way to deliver their message. In fact, a couple of my colleagues and I, we were introducing these people to other folks in the room, including staff, but we had to coax them to write it down. So some people are there with that inclination and expectation to be able to speak to all, in particular all of council. So I just wanted to pass that on. Finally, every year, as mentioned, the summaries get better and better, also including the public input summaries for council. However, we don't deal with them any differently year by year, and I'm going back now 15, 20 years. Councils do not, in my opinion, spend enough time, appear to be spending enough time considering that public input package. We rarely make changes unless it's something like pickleball or projects like that, groups of people with something to say or that are very pressing. But we should, I feel, do a better job of letting the public know, be seen to be giving better consideration to that public input. And maybe the issue is the formality of the meeting opportunity that we have for doing that. Maybe there's an opportunity for more of an informal, us talking amongst each other about the public input before us. But I feel for the sake of the public, I think we should give more attention to that input package when it's finally received. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a question for staff. One of the pieces here is the sort of workshop time, and the timing of it was quite compressed this year. And I wondered how, which I felt from my experience, I quite liked it. I felt like I didn't have to sort of read back to start the work again. It was fresh in my mind. But I felt like some of the times, it felt like staff had to do more work leading to, and there's less space between to adjust. And I just wondered what staff's experience was with that piece. And is this, or does that perception that I'm having align with staff's experience? Was it reasonable, that timeline? I'm assuming if it wasn't, we'd see some asks here, maybe something about that. But could you speak to that piece, and did that what constraints did it present, given that it was such a compressed time period?
Thank you for the question, through you, Mayor. Reflecting back, I mean, it is always challenging when we don't have a lot of time between meetings. I think what we were able to achieve, that the compressed timeline was helpful, is that it kept the cadence going, kept things fresh. We weren't repeating things at the beginning. We, kept moving. The real changes happened at the tying it all together, which was a grace for staff, is that we were really focusing on each subject. So SOP, capital, general operating, and then the time crunch was those last two meetings. So overall, I think it worked well. I think the benefit was really around keeping that cadence. And that I think staff appreciated the most in that. We would recommend doing it again, if that's any indication on how staff felt. Now, there wasn't any massive change one way or another that could pose a challenge. But certainly October was great for the workshops. We do trickle into November. There's just not enough weeks in a month to achieve it all, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I quite enjoyed that process. It kept it fresh in my mind, as you said, and that cadence was there. I wonder about how, just making sure that we have space, or if there does need to be a change, it doesn't derail the whole system. So the whole timing. So I mean, a substantive change. So it feels like. I think we got there in the end, but that was a very loaded time. I just wonder about like a week earlier in the same time to have a bit of room. But then again, like planning agendas in this room, like 30-minute conversation could be an hour if we do that. But I just I felt like there was some risk there, but we didn't run into it. So maybe that's the urgency that we all need to get it across the line. But I was a little I sort of felt that risk all the way through, that if there was something that we tripped on and needed to work through, that we wouldn't hit that adoption time that we were setting out to. So I think that conversation around trade-offs, as I've heard a few of my colleagues mention, I think is really important, and is something I try to bring to the conversations when I have them individually and when I'm speaking more broadly to the community. And I think anything that we can do to sort of show that a little bit is around those decisions that we're grappling with. Like the actual question that we're being asked is, this now taxation, derailing something else. And I know that there's an infinite number of combinations of projects and funding and taxation, so it's hard to run through. But like some additional supports there, whether it's to use a placeholder dollar value to look at what a percentage tax increase is, or just some rough tools for that, because I found that we were all sort of using different versions of that as we're communicating to the community to articulate what the trade-offs that we're grappling with are and what the impacts of them could be. I think the format of the actually I'll start earlier. I found the public feedback piece early on very, very helpful, and I'm looking for that to be reflected in the budget as we move through it. And I actually think that I see quite a lot of that feedback represented in the budget. So for me, I think that process has been good, and obviously some of the feedback is more is easier to integrate than others, and you can parse out pieces of it. But I do think that piece went well. I just want to make sure that and I find it useful, and I refer back to it often as I'm moving through the process. And then when the sort of the meeting, the public information piece, I quite like the format. I find we did do the coffee with council, and I think I made it to one of those, but the mayor's drop-in wasn't, in particular, that event didn't really work for the budget engagement, more than recognizing that every conversation is a budget conversation, as we heard from Councillor Pettingill, and I'm glad that that's sort of sticking. But the specifically supporting the budget conversation, it didn't really have that impact. So I just wonder, I think the standalone piece where everyone's there, all staff, all council, is great. It's the supporting ones, I think we could do something a little, keep trying and see what's working. But the mayor's drop-in piece, I didn't think was really fit with that engagement directly. Yeah, I think that's it. I'm going to go over to Councillor Stoner.
Thanks to the chair. I just want to pick up on the timing piece, because I do think that the condensed version was helpful in keeping the cadence. But going back to Councillor Anderson's comment, it doesn't leave much room to make changes, especially when we're getting public feedback at the end. And this is a catch-22 that we've had a few times, especially if we're looking at for December adoption. And so I know that we get compressed with UBCM in September, but I do think if we can start a little bit earlier, just to give ourselves like a few weeks breathing room. I will say that I know myself, and I believe all my council colleagues do very thoroughly go through the feedback that we receive in the budget package. But even just as a matter of perception, when you get it less than a week before you're actually meant to adopt the budget, it doesn't feel like you're actually giving it due consideration, because then the risk is you then don't adopt the budget until January, and that has fall-on effects. So I think just from a if I'm being honest, perception for transparency, ensuring that we have due diligence so that folks have time to ruminate on the budget before it actually goes to adoption. If we can at least expand that by a few weeks, that would go a long way.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor Herford. Just one further observation. There's reference in the staff's question or to workshop time, district staff capacity. It is probably 2, but maybe 3 occasions during the fall budget process where we have more than 24 staff members in the room for a council session and more online. And it typically, I'm thinking back now a few years, is typically there are about half a dozen of those members of staff who are called upon for a particular question or clarification of some matter. So my question is, or observation is there not a way to alleviate that staff time that's committed with those sessions, since most of the staff members are not engaged in those sessions, and it's quite typically not? And perhaps there's another way for at least some of that process, those sessions, for it to be replaced by written questions in advance, as we normally do, so that we can maybe alleviate some of that staff time that's committed to those sessions, when rather few, in fact, of the staff members are consulted by council in question and answer questions sessions. Thank you. That's an observation.
Yeah, you're welcome to reply at any time to any of these. Go ahead.
Thank you, through the mayor. Just for clarity, is council referring to the workshops in council chambers when all of the budget managers are here?
Yes, that's correct. The council chambers session is what I had in mind. Thank you.
And thank you. This is about receiving feedback, and we'll consider that. If I can add, this year was different in that we made it mandatory for budget managers to be here. In as much as it's here to support council and answer questions, what is also important is that budget managers are here and in the room and understand the tone, the questions, council's concerns around budget. As the stewards of the budget and those that are implementing it, I believe that it's really valuable for them to be in the room. I get that there's a lot of payroll sitting in the seats. This is what they do, however, right? This is what they're doing on your behalf. And we did receive feedback from those budget managers that they found it very, very valuable to be in the room and understand and really, you know, for lack of a better expression, feel what council's concerns are and stresses are and areas of priority. But so that is from our perspective, that for the staff, it was valuable from that perspective, rather than reading minutes or those of us on the core leadership team to interpret and provide that information to them. They get it real time, what you're thinking and feeling as council around the budget.
Yeah, and just I want to weigh in on this point. I think it's important that we sort of discuss these things a little bit to understand what everybody's after. On that one, I felt quite the opposite. I quite liked having everybody here, and it made me feel that we had the expertise in the room to address my concerns or those of council. And given the compressed timeline, if we needed information from one of those people that wasn't here, then to move something forward, then again, there's that risk for the whole process. So I see tremendous value in having everybody here, so that we can have the information that we need to move things forward. And I appreciate the comments about submitting what we can in advance, and that is always helpful. But quite often it's the conversation in the room and the different perspectives that trigger some more questions, and we go somewhere so I think it is important that we have the experts available to us on this, so we can ensure that we have the information that we need to make an informed decision. And it's also good to sort of take pause of like the actual amount of resources and the amount of minds that have gone into making these recommendations for us too. So I It is a bit staggering seeing everyone there. Absolutely, I share that. But at the same time, I think without that, there's tremendous risk to our process. I'll go around the room. Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. Just following up on that one, I see the point, and thank you for the clarity of the wording. There's a lot of payroll in the room, and I also hadn't reflected on the value to staff, to feeling the tone in the room. That is extraordinarily valuable. I had reflected on the efficiency of our conversations, us being able to have those questions answered as they pop up potentially in the meeting is very important to us. So I do think it's important, particularly if we keep on a somewhat compressed timeline, to have those to have the budget managers in the room. That also reminds me of a connection that I sense between the idea of a town hall in our public engagement. When we have feedback through only through one-on-one interaction or through digital or through written feedback, we don't sense, as a council, we don't sense the tone of the room, and our community doesn't sense the tone of the rest of the community. So I think we do lose something when we don't have that town hall meeting in public when we're communicating our budget. But I do see that there are other sides. It's not something that I will, not a hill I will die on, but I do see value in the town hall. If I can, I'll take a few minutes to go through a few other things. This is related to, I think, what I was hearing between Councillor Pettingill's comment about the one number. We shouldn't focus on the one number, and a little bit of Councillor Anderson's concerns about, we have to go to the budget book to show the citizens the line item. I think we can improve on finding somewhere in the middle. I agree we shouldn't be just setting budget should increase, taxes should increase by a set number for next year and do whatever you need to do to make that happen. Our role is to balance priorities, but I think that it is very difficult. I find it challenging to balance priorities when we are tasked with examining 1,000 line items and we can make comment on one line item without full line of sight into the consequences of changing that one line item. Yeah. The engineering department, I think this was 2 budget cycles ago, mentioned that they were prioritizing their budget, if I understood this correct, prioritizing their needs. And, they set their budget to say, this is how much we need. And if you give us more, we can achieve this much more. If you give us less, these are the things that'll get knocked off the table. It was my understanding that process was planned on being expanded if possible. Am I correct on that? And is that still in the works? And might we see it next year or? Yeah.
Thank you for the question through the chair. Yes, that's correct. So we have been incrementally expanding it, and we will certainly do so more in the future. It started with engineering. It was specifically around capital. It started with engineering because they are 90 to 95% of our capital, and we've taken the learnings and the opportunities from that and started to integrate that into the other departments.
So will we see that come back to us in the budget process in some way where we will have some kind of different organization or some categorization? I know categorization is difficult when you've got so many items to be categorized in so many different ways, but is there a different mechanism that we will be able to give you feedback and say, let's say we think community planning should be increased and public works should be decreased or something like that, right? Because we need to think about the broad scope, not the line item by line item, but I feel like we can only comment line item by line item.
Thank you through the chair. Yeah, we'll certainly take that feedback back. Currently, The development is around sort of the overall prioritization from a life safety risk, from a financial risk. We could look at incorporating that into the capital plan in terms of what ranking they got. Loads of opportunity there. We'll take a look, and yeah, thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have a solution. I just have a sense of a problem here. The other things that I'm seeing, I don't think this is part of the budget process, but I think this speaks to one of Councillor Anderson's concerns about seeing, I'll call them small budget line items around $10,000 or $30,000 fall off the budget. There's a level where staff are free to make discretionary decisions, and not all of those should be coming to council. Council can't spend time deciding on every $10,000 line item. But there's a level where things really do need to come to council. And it's not clear to me what that mechanism is for staff to decide. I'm sure it's not like written as a policy, because there's too many possibilities and opportunities. But I'll take it to the extreme and take our largest capital project, right now the Public Works building, our largest capital project. Do we have a system in place where we know this is a very big capital project and we need to have these sorts of triggers, these kinds of processes in place to ensure everything is going efficiently? And this is below that threshold where staff can make decisions without a huge administrative burden. Do you have any process? Like, how does that work? I know that's a difficult question to answer, but.
I'll do my best. I'm not sure I'm totally following the question, but I'm assuming what you're talking about is, like, what's the threshold for when something comes to council for approval, essentially, in regards to projects. The budget process itself is where that happens, after which that budget item, whether it's $40 million or $10,000, has been granted approval from council, after which our delegation bylaw and our policy around purchasing determines who can approve a particular spend amount. And then within the projects themselves, certainly the complexity of how a project is managed is dependent on the project scale. So the Public Works building, because that's the example you used, has an entire system around it and checks and balances. A $10,000 item, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but would be less complex, certainly. But it's ultimately the budget process where council provides that approval. And then the quarterly reporting on budget and variance is where, whether things are on track or not, in terms of budget, come to council. We are currently, as a staff team, so that council's aware, putting together, like, historically we had like facilities, like real estate and master, not getting the acronym right, but the facilities builds come forward as an update, and that had everything from covered structures, because that was politically fraught last term, up to Public Works. We're putting together, in conjunction with the variance reporting, project updates for council, so that it's not just the number value, but that you can appreciate updates on milestones and accomplishments within those projects. And the criteria for what projects land on that, we're working that out right now, and we'll bring that back to you, but that's outside of the budget process. I hope that provides a bit of comfort for council, that we are looking at ways to keep you informed on those larger, more consequential projects.
Great, thanks. I think, yeah, that's keeping us up to date and informed on the large consequential projects. I think that's the thing I'm missing, is to have to feel like we have our eye on the ball when the ball is our big financially consequential projects. It really became clear to me when the variances on the Capital Works budget was greater than the actual the splash park, the entire splash park budget. So if we keep our eyes focused on the major projects, make sure those are running cleanly and efficiently, we can have more money for other things, hopefully.
I need to, I've got a few on my speakers list, and I just want to tell council we're in the last 10 minutes of the time we have allotted to this, last 8 minutes technically. So I'm going to go around. We've got Councillor Greenlaw, French, then Pettingill to finish us this session off, hopefully. And if there's time, I'll come back to you, Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks. Through the chair, just wanted to say thanks to staff for putting together all this information. I wanted to put my 2 cents in about a couple things that we've been discussing. The council meetings on budget, to Councillor Anderson's point, so you're right, these are very expensive meetings to hold, but I do feel strongly that especially in this day and age, it's important to increase or at least maintain transparency and communication for the public with their governance structure. And also, I think it's important to bring everyone in the same room just to serve as an educational experience for everyone. I've said this before, I think this government would benefit from far more collaboration and collaborative efforts. So I think it's important to maintain that meeting structure of just having everybody in the same room at the same time. And I think it expedites a lot of our functionality as well. To Councillor Stoner and Anderson's points about incorporating public opinion on budget, the last thing we want to do is have our public engagement pieces be perceived to be performative. I feel strongly as an elected official that I am here to represent public concerns and needs. And the budget is no small part of that. That's what most people, it's the most important piece to most people. So it's important to me that we're listening to the public when we're making our decisions and not falling into a paternalistic role of governance knows best when it's not appropriate to do so. So with that in mind, I would appreciate having that public input as early as possible to take that under consideration so that it can be acted upon. I think the budget book piece is a step in the right direction. And I tend to err on the side, like Councillor Anderson, of I lovingly call myself a Luddite, but I do love a good searchable spreadsheet. So I think the combination of the binders and the budget book is pretty good. Unfortunately, I missed a lot of the engagement pieces this year. It was just an unfortunate coincidence with my existing calendar. But at the Wellness Fair, to Councillor Pettengill's point, most/all of the people that I spoke to were unaware of the budget cycle. They didn't know, they knew very little about it, didn't know that we were there to discuss it. And one person asked me if I was representing a nonprofit, and I was like, sort of. But anyway, so I think to that point, it's hard for the communications team, but, keep getting that word out that that's what we're talking about. And that's, these are the ways that we can engage. But yeah, that's just an observation that I had from that session. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna go to Councillor French, Pettingill, and then.
Thank you. I think I can keep it brief. Just a few thoughts and reflections on what I've heard in this conversation. I liked having the session with the managers in the room. I thought that was a good use of their time and our financial resources. Having them sitting right there with the answers ready to go for our questions for the most part, I think was positive and helpful. Not a big fan of town hall meetings for issues like budget feedback. They tend to be opportunities for grandstanders who enjoy 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 to 15 minutes in the limelight, listening to themselves talk. And I did want to make sure that at some point during this session, somebody brought up Let's Talk Squamish. I thought that was an excellent tool, particularly for people who don't want to be at in-person sessions. Shy folks, people on spectrum. Let's Talk was, I think, well used, and I checked it on a regular basis and got for myself some excellent feedback from residents who I'm pretty sure otherwise would not have participated in the budget process. So let's do the Let's Talk budget thing as well in the year ahead or better, because I found it quite helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just a couple things. I want to come back on the public input package piece. I actually spent a lot of time with it, and I felt that personally I had enough time to ask questions. It may be worthwhile, when we submit our feedback after coffee with the council to CC all of council. I know we can't have meetings in an email, but not all those came through to all of council right away, and maybe that's a way to get some of that feedback earlier. I do take the point about the perception, and I do have an anxiety of, well, what if something brand new comes along? Do we have enough time to adapt to it if the feedback comes in late? But the flip side of that is, of the several years I've been on council, it's been incredibly rare, to the point of never, where there's been something surprising that I've never heard of come out in the feedback. And to the point of, every discussion is a budget discussion. We're out engaging with the community all the time, all year long, and everything's not framed as a budget discussion, but we're having these conversations and hearing these things all the time. And so for me, it's great to give additional opportunities and to sort of confirm and make sure that we're not missing anything. But I didn't hear, or I haven't heard, I had some questions. I was able to follow up with staff about specific things and get clarification, which was great. But there generally, I find, isn't, so far anyways, thankfully, of like, whoa, the public sentiment is something completely different than what we've had, because we're doing that work effectively all the time, I think. So just to make that point. The other thing is, I think is going to be important, the framing of the survey. As I listen to people talk, I would not want this to be framed as, or set an expectation that this is a budget referendum, and what people say is necessarily how things will fall out. Is certainly critical information, but I think if you look at the spending, and we've had this conversation of athletics versus arts, there's a significant disparity over time, and that will have the outcome of always creating more demand for athletics. And that may be a good thing or not. But as we see some increasing demand for culture and arts, there may be a leadership opportunity to shift that spending a little bit, maybe for a little while, or maybe not. But I think those are some of the things we'll need to grapple with as a council when we see survey results. And so it's not necessarily, at least from my perspective, just because most people in the survey say this, that's exactly what the budget line item is going to be. Maybe it will, but I just hope people don't necessarily have an understanding that this is critical information gathering, but it's not a referendum in my mind.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner. Well, thank you. You helped us land right on 12 o'clock, which is the time we had allotted for this. I'm gonna go to staff for just quickly. Does staff have what they needed from this? Was there anything outstanding that you want us to weigh in on while we are all here to do this? I've heard comments sort of on most of the pieces across the board. I just want to make sure that you have what you need when you leave this room.
Thank you for the question through the chair. Yes, I appreciate the feedback. I think we've received everything we've needed to take a look at, and we're looking forward to. Feels like things just dried, but we're looking forward to a new new financial planning season. So yeah, we'll bring back some of the recommendations and what we can achieve this upcoming cycle, and certainly beyond as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So just on that note, I was thinking about the next touch points. You've heard about the satisfaction survey piece, and does that come to council only after, or we hear about that as part of the rollout? Just trying to make sure that we all have the same expectations here.
Through you, Mayor. We were anticipating sharing the questions in advance for council review, and then we will follow up with the results in mid-April.
Okay, thank you. And then with the budgets, or designing the process for next year's budget, when should we expect to sort of have that conversation? Because I feel like a lot of these comments are sort of rolling into that next piece.
Through the chair, we haven't actually set a time yet. I think what we can do is get something on the agenda shortly after we have the citizen satisfaction back and we've had a chance to sort of think about what we can improve, what we can't achieve in this budget cycle. And so perhaps somewhere in June-ish would work.
Okay. Councilor Hamilton, I'll just see if there's anything prior to any of those touch points that you want to say at this point, or we can move on to our next piece. There'll be other opportunities coming, is what I was trying to think. Thank you so much. It's for all the work to get us here on the other side of one budget process and near the start line of the next. So thank you very much. Council, next we have a discussion on the Lower Mainland Local Government Association and Union of British Columbia Municipalities resolution requests. And I believe we have a quick presentation on this. And I've circulated, thank you for those that have submitted some information for this. And I've circulated one resolution in council mail as well, which I'll speak about, but just to give you a heads up that it's in there. Oh, look at that. The floor is yours when you're ready. Thank you for that.
Department. Hello, I'm Jenny Franks, the Legislative Assistant to Mayor and Council in the Corporate Administration Department. What we're going to do today basically is review local government, the resolutions process, the relevant dates to the District of Squamish in that process. We'll introduce some resolution recommendations from council and from staff. And then council can have a discussion on what they want to do moving forward. So for an outline, local governments are given the opportunity to advocate to the provincial government for improvements to provincial policy or legislation. These requests have to go through these requests must be regional or provincial in nature and relevant to other local governments. Resolutions first go to the regional or area association, and Squamish's area is the Lower Mainland Local Government Association, LMLGA. At the LMLGA conference, the members vote on which resolutions to endorse. Endorsed resolutions are then forwarded to the Union of BC Municipalities, or UBCM. Then, at the UBCM conference, all local elected officials are invited to debate and vote on the proposed resolutions. Successful resolutions from there are presented to the province, which then indicates if and how they will work towards addressing the request. Today's meeting is an opportunity for council to consider and discuss which resolutions they would like submitted to LMLGA. At the February 25th Committee of the Whole, council will have the opportunity to finalize the wording and vote on specific resolution submissions. Ratifications of these successful resolutions will be on March 4th and then submitted on the March 5th deadline to LMLGA. Following are the council resolution recommendations, just the titles: Fighting Period Poverty, Coastal Marine Strategy, and Tiny Homes. And then the District of Squamish staff initiatives that could be considered for resolutions. MOTI jurisdiction and DCC bylaw integration. Local transit funding model. Expansion of the active transportation infrastructure grant. Flood protection funding. Latecomer charges. Environmental Assessment Act review process, common law private covenants versus zoning bylaw, and land for affordable housing. And there was one advocacy request received from the Squamish Public Library for provincial funding for libraries is overdue. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, I think here we're best to go. Actually, I have a question around the period poverty resolution went to UBCM as a late item, didn't end up being debated on the floor, but was there not a similar item that passed? And do we need to do this to get it back to UBCM? It's already there. There's a piece that passed that felt like it was close. Just where are we at on that piece process-wise?
So yes, there was another municipality that had a similar resolution, which did get presented to the province. As of today, the province has not responded to that request. So it was recommended that we could choose whether we would like to resubmit it to the coming process, to the 2025 process. If it is responded to by the province, then we can remove that request even after LMLGA book is published.
Okay, and given that this one went to UBCM, is it a complete reset in that something that's there with them already and wasn't discussed? What's the process there? I don't know who's best. I'm fine to go either way. If we're doubling efforts, that's fine. I just want to do it intentionally if that's what we're doing. Councillor Stone, do you have the question? Yeah.
Thank you, through the chair. With my UBCM hat on and member of the resolutions committee, I can say that the resolution that was passed in 2024 was directed specifically to UBCM, and UBCM has actioned it accordingly. The responses from the provincial government won't be expected until later on this year for the 2024 resolutions that were passed. So, but that specific one on period poverty was directed to UBCM for action. And I believe staff have taken that.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted, that one was a bit interesting process-wise. So, okay. Why don't we start with the discussion here? I think we've supported that motion previously, the fighting period poverty. So I would imagine that I'm going to take that as, unless we want to have a further discussion on that, I think we're aligned that that's how it got to UBCM in the first place, was through our table. So I don't think we need to revisit that. We've had the ask of the provincial funding for the library and then the coastal piece. Do we want to, the library has, I think the library, of course, has supporting documentation, as does the motion from Councillor Greenlaw, but I think I'll go to Councillor Greenlaw first, actually, on that piece. Do you want to run us through that? Marine coastal strategy. Thank you.
Yeah, again, this is another piece that I think there are a few different municipalities who are kind of championing this. It's fairly self-explanatory. There's a briefing here, and it's mostly just kind of covering our bases, really, and trying to ensure that that things are protected. The only comments I would make about the piece that we have and the motion itself is, like, obviously some of the language needs to be tweaked so it doesn't say Sandwich Council on it. It says Squamish. But yeah, I've spoken to some people about it. I've spoken to West Coast Law, but I've also spoken to Ruth Simons about it, and she's quite supportive of it. So it seems like a pretty good step forward.
Okay, and is this something that is looking to go through the Vancouver Island Area Association and LMLG in a substantively the same form, or is this something that you'd like to have staff look at with and help you revise and see if there's any revisions to fit our specific context in that way? Like, are you looking for just support here, or do you think there's another step and you'd like them to be the same? Is that the goal?
Well, I'm happy to hear, if staff has input of some way of making this more effective in general. But yes, the plan is to have this go through ABICC and also LMLGA and just have multiple regions of support kind of thing to effectively give it clout on a provincial level.
Okay. Yeah, great. I think that having just having meet with staff on this and just see if there's anything here that should change or there's an addition to make it stronger, I think would be helpful to be supportive of that. Anyone have any challenges with what they're seeing here or that approach? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't have a challenge with the ask here. Or supporting it. However, my issue is that the provincial coastal marine strategy is misnamed. And I've got in front of me the table of contents. I've been through it thoroughly and discussed it with various organizations. It does not address a large part of what a marine strategy would be expected to address. I used to work for the Coastal Communities Network, which was mainly based on fishing communities in the late 90s. And that organization wouldn't endorse this marine strategy because it does not address sustainable coastal economy to the extent it should. It does not address commercial marine transportation. It doesn't address infrastructure and planning for coastal harbors, including dredging for Squamish. There's a lot that it doesn't do. And looking at the original motion from 2020 from Port Moody, this strategy on the part of the province should better be called a coastal protection strategy. Its emphasis is environmental protection and First Nations, but it's not coastal economy. That's an observation. I don't have a problem to endorse it as is, but it's a problem I have with the province's approach, and I'm not alone. Thank you.
Okay. So at this point, we're looking to just make sure I have process really is just get a feel for council's appetite on these and to see if we should be working on them if there's any issues at this point. So I'm not seeing any on this one. So I think I think we should connect Councillor Greenlaw. You're the champion of this one to connect with staff just to see if there's anything that should be included or modified, and then we'll discuss it for endorsement at the next meeting. Does that sound good to everybody? I'm not seeing any hands shooting up as a showstopper, so we'll advance that. The library, it is one of our most current or most recent library board member want to take this one up or perhaps work together on this if it needs anything changed? But go ahead, Councillor Anderson.
Mayor Herford, I'm at a loss here as this particular item was not discussed at our last meeting. I'm a brand new director. Perhaps Councillor Hamilton may be better suited to address this particular item.
Yep, go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, thanks. So the campaign, the Overdue campaign, was a campaign we saw at last year's UBCM. I don't recall if the Overdue campaign, if the motion didn't make it to the resolution session, if it got timed out, or maybe it wasn't. But it is a part of a larger campaign through other communities, and it's the primary motivation, the primary thrust of it is to increase provincial funding to public libraries because there's been a downloading of provincial responsibilities onto municipalities for funding libraries. And we've been seeing a trend from long-term sustainable funding of libraries to short-term 1-year, 2-year grant funding for libraries, which is clearly not a way you can build a long-term community resource 1 year at a time. So it's yep, that's the spirit of the overdue campaign.
Okay. I think just I want to call out the one statistic here was that the province has grown by 29% while the public libraries have continued to rely on stagnant funding, which is a massive percentage jump. So I'm very supportive of this initiative and bringing this forward. Councillor Penigo?
Yeah, just I recall that previously the current mayor of New West had been very active at UBCM on funding of public libraries and so on. And so I wonder if there might be some interest or collaboration or information there on this particular resolution, which I do support.
Okay, so I think maybe a way here is if we have each of these initiatives has a champion or two to work on, and we can provide perhaps some folks to talk to or some level of refinement. So is this you, Councillor Hamilton, in this case?
Not clear whether it should be me or perhaps Councillor Anderson as the representative on the library board right now, but I'd be happy to take this on.
I'm going to nominate suggest a team effort here as part of the knowledge building of the sort of the transition there. So if you're okay with that, Councillor?
Yes, I might advise I will not be able to attend this upcoming LMLGA conference due to the change in dates. I just didn't make my plans around the new dates. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're clear on that one. I had before we go to the staff. Well, actually, I'll start with the staff piece. I just wanted the motion I circulated was something that was put forward by Pemberton last year, and it ultimately wasn't supported at UBCM. I wanted to recognize it went directly to UBCM, and I'm not saying that we take the exact same resolution forward, but it kind of gets at this flood protection funding, and what they were trying to articulate is that if you need 5 kilometers if you have 5 kilometers of zero flood protection, rather than doing something that would affect all 5 kilometers, the current regulations have you do a 1 in 200 year, which may only be able to, for the same funds, cover 100 meters, which doesn't provide any protection. So it's about having the flexibility to take interim measures and to take practical steps to protect a community. And when I think about downtown flooding in Squamish, yes, Sea Dike, yes, we want to do it. Yes, sea level rise, yes, let's do it. We're working on it, and we've got pieces of our community protected, but the entire community is not protected to even to a lower standard at this point. So while we're doing 200 year plus standard through Honiak Park, or will be shortly, there's still stretches that aren't protected, and the current mechanisms aren't really set up to recognize that. And I think some of the concerns when I reflect on the debate that happened at UBCM was around, well, we shouldn't be lowering our flood standards. We're seeing with the changes we're seeing in the climate, we're seeing more extreme weather events, and these return periods are maybe not appropriately labeled for their frequency and so on. And it isn't about lowering the standard. It's about providing the most protection that we can with dollars spent on diking, and that's kind of the short pitch. So there was subsequent to that email, I did circulate the comments from UBCM, and there's some research into previous motions on this type of thing, but I'd like to work with staff on, and I feel that perhaps there might be multiple resolutions coming out of this flood protection funding piece, but I'm happy to move that forward based on and work with staff to see what we can what we can get there to make sure that we're pointing at the right piece of legislation and really get at the root of the challenges. That's my short elevator pitch. I'll have it more refined next time if that's general direction supported by council. So any questions or comments on that piece? Anyone want to, seeing none, anyone want to help with the development of that one? I'm happy to move to lead on this one and bring it back to council. Councillor Anderson, you look like you're ready to push a button. Is that on this or another item?
Well, Mayor Herford, I was going to offer my moral support to the Pemberton resolution for the reason that our situation in Squamish is so diverse. And we have such a variety of circumstances to deal with and timelines and costs and choices to make. For example, the Adventure Center and Rose Park. What are we going to do there? When? What options are there? Are the standards suitable or that we might refer to? Do they need some work? Do we need some leeway? That's just one example of a very diverse flood protection, coastal protection landscape that we have in Squamish. So speaking in support, and I can perhaps come back to you, Mayor Herford, if I have further observations on that.
Yeah, thank you. I think at this point, I'm just looking for sort of high level concept endorsement here, and we'll refine it to something that we can really get our teeth into at the next meeting. So I'm seeing no hands on this one, so I'm going to assume that that's that we've got some support, and then we'll go through the rest of this list. I'm just cognizant, trying to keep us on time. Is there anything else outside of this list that anyone has before we just to go there? I'm going to go to Councillor Greenlaw and then Hamilton.
Thanks, through the chair. I might need some staff clarity on this piece, procedurally, how it works to put forward a motion that's been previously defeated. I'm specifically asking about the motion that Councillor French put forward, I think it was 2 years ago, about tax exemptions for religious organizations, and it was not supported at LMLGA, but I would like to bring it back and resubmit it. I don't know what the time allowance is for it and what the support is.
I don't know. Councillor Stoner, do you have something for us?
Thank you. Through the chair, you're welcome to resubmit either the same motion or something with different wording. I would recommend that if it wasn't supported in recent history, that you should probably suggest changing the wording. And then the resolutions committee at UBCM will review it. Depending on how recently it was defeated by the body, it may end up in the non-endorsed block, and then you'd have to pull it out, but it won't be automatically defeated. It'll just end up in the non-endorsed block. So you can always resubmit. So
I was just Councillor French and I were communicating by hands. It was 2 years ago, that particular motion. So if you'd like to work from that motion, I don't know if would you like to take that on? We can task you guys with taking that on. And I think reflecting on that debate, it was I thought it was a healthy debate, but there's definitely some pieces in it that I think some of the wording could change. I think there might be able to get it there. So without changing the intent. So, but I think we're all there in that room. So I'll leave it to you guys to see what you can do with that and bring it back to us the next touch point. Is that any other? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Anderson. Wait, was it on this point? I have a speakers list otherwise. Okay, I'll come back to you. Sorry, Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, I've got so I had 2 things on my list. One was the local transit funding model. I was glad to see exactly the same thing appear from staff. I know this has come up in the past, moving to a 3-year cycle instead of a 1-year cycle in our transit funding. I think that's important. We need to make plans in our community. Community plans are much longer than 1-year timescales. So I think it would be good to have our transit funding secured for to have a clearer line of sight for a longer time in the funding. The other piece I wanted to ask, and this is much more raw, a little less cooked in my mind. It came to, so it comes to the the SOFI reporting, our Statement of Financial Information, my understanding is provincially obliged, we are obliged through the Local Government Act or Community Charter, I'm not sure which one, to provide this SOFI report, and every municipality does this. But this is an enormous wealth of information that is difficult to find, is difficult to go to one place and say, I wonder what could I get the SOFI report information from every municipality in BC for 2023? It's really difficult to do. You have to go to each municipality's website, download their SOFI report and read it. So I'd like to see if it makes sense, if this doesn't exist already, some mechanism to ask either, I would imagine it's the province, to request that the province make SOFI reports digitally, like a machine readable, sort of in some kind of downloadable format, other than a PDF, which is only machine readable after processing through a human's eyes. Machine readable SOFI format, SOFI reports for municipalities to use that data to inform how they're performing with respect to other municipalities in the province. Do staff have any?
So are you meaning like a centralization
Yep.
as well as, okay. So that
Centralization of the information.
Okay. Any staff comment on that?
Where would that live if it did live?
If we don't have if we don't have anyone that can comment or wants to comment in the room right now, we can take that forward and do some work on that. But is there any comments on that at this point? I just want to make sure that we know that we're not here to resolve all those things, but just to make sure that, yeah, but go ahead.
Thank you for the question through the chair. I can't answer specifically where that would possibly live. I think just in a word of caution, if council's specifically speaking to remuneration, that's only one element of the SOFI report. The SOFI report is governed by the charter, the LGA, as well as the Financial Administration Act. And it's the whole encompassing of the financial statement. So not sure how that would align in terms of format. So just the word of caution on what that is, but yeah, I couldn't comment on where they would keep it.
Okay. I think so me understanding like where that information lives and what those requirements are, and if it should be centralized so that it could be used for other purposes rather than just the individuals in the community looking at their organization. Some sort of, is that that's what you're thinking? Okay. Yeah, I'd like to know some more about what it is that we're asking there, just to make sure that we're, that it's reasonable. But I think there could be something to that. Anyone have any interest in helping or doesn't see value in? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Pettengill.
In helping out, my understanding is the BC government does maintain an open data portal. Now what's required in getting things on there, I'm not sure what that process is, but they have in theory a mechanism to do this.
I would love to have you two humans. I think we have the right, some strong expertise here to sort of push on this open data aspect. So I like that. Okay, that works for me. I've got Councillor Anderson, and then I'm gonna try to wrap, and then Pettengill. But we'll be over time there, but that's okay. Let's try to move through this, and yeah, we'll get there.
I'll try to be super quick. I am in discussion with the former planner of Metro Vancouver on an industrial land resolution. In the provincial government's mandate letters, there's an item under Jobs Economic Development Ministry specifically focusing on industrial land inventory, creating new industrial lands, facilitating that cause. And there's never been a UBCM resolution on industrial lands inventory or protection since 2006, and that was City of North Vancouver, and it failed. There's a current one in the BC Chamber's policy manual on protection of industrial lands. It's up for review this year. The mayor and I met with the Chamber of Commerce last week, and I think, Mayor Herford, that I think it would be a good idea to work where appropriate with the Chamber on something like this. I'm still working towards what the ask would be, and I'm inclined to work towards suggesting to the province that a program offering support for industrial land planning would be a good idea. We ourselves need to be doing some industrial land planning. We'll probably be building a new industrial park within the next decade. We need to. And there's a lot of things to catch up on from elsewhere that could be incorporated in a package of monetary support or advisory support to municipalities on industrial land planning. That's where I'm at the present time. It does also support our OCP as an item on industrial land inventory and monitoring. And I'd be more comfortable to come back a little bit later in written form, giving more details. But that's what I'm up to, working with a planner and potentially with the Chamber of Commerce and North Vancouver, which has been provincially the leader in getting behind this cause. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a really interesting piece of, I think it's really important work, and I'm supportive of that, and definitely connecting with our staff as to what pieces they would be helpful in our process, I think is important. And particularly when we're seeing a push on the housing file, which I support, and but just to understand that it can't be housing above all else. We need to really ensure that we have well thought out communities with employment spaces is part of that too. So I think that's really important work. So does anyone have any challenges with that conceptually at this point? Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Anderson, for bringing that forward. I think that's really, really timely. Go ahead, Councillor French. Or sorry, I have Pettingill and French.
Thanks. I'll just say quickly, I do support the staff advocacy recommendations. It's not clear to me which ones should be sort of staff to staff conversations and so on versus resolutions or both. Have my own thoughts, but in general, as a group, all these topics I think are relevant and important. But I want to bring one forward. It's not baked yet. I think I've been talking to people in our community that, given what's happening politically in the States and in Canada and actually in the world, people don't feel welcome, don't feel safe or as welcome and safe as they have previously. I think there's maybe just at a Squamish level some value in asserting that we are a welcoming and safe place, but I think a resolution for BC to declare that. I'd like to talk a little bit further to some of the people expressing concerns. I think the symbolic is important, but we don't want it to be merely superficial. And so getting the wording and framing right is important. But I think at this point, something along those lines would be worthwhile.
Okay. Thank you for that. I don't see any hands of protest. I think that's really, yeah, thank you for recognizing that and bringing that forward. I think that's an interesting piece. Go ahead, Councillor French.
Thank you, Mayor. And I wanted to update you on my thought about taking another crack at tiny homes. It's mostly inspired by work being done primarily by the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities Group. And I say primarily, there are also folks across the province who are interested in this. So the current AVICC resolution wording talks about recognizing recreational vehicles as acceptable forms of permanent housing. And I'm really struggling with that idea. So it's one of the reasons why I'm taking a half step back and then a full step back when it was shared with me this morning that there's a thought that those advocating for tiny homes should move to meeting the housing minister as a collective. Because constantly rewording a resolution without substantive changes isn't productive. I'm looking at you, Councillor Stoner. She's nodding. So I think that that's valid. And the best way to move this forward is probably by working directly with the housing minister. So I'm taking that one off the table. And then in doing so, recognizing that I have interest in the common law private covenants versus zoning bylaw. And I'd be happy to help out with that if staff is looking for councillor participation. Also, land for affordable housing is of interest. I love Councillor Anderson's industrial lands thing, and the half-baked idea from Councillor Pettingill is very attractive in light of what's going on with our neighbors to the south, threatening war against DEI. Thank you.
Okay, I think when I was looking at these, the provincial advocacy recommendations, I think some of these are, our meetings, and others could be resolutions. So I think right now, if you're interested, we've had the transit one picked up, Councillor Hamilton. And this is something we have had minister meetings directly on, but it shouldn't, you think? So I think the discussion here is these things all are important, just what lives where and what's a specific meeting, what's underway. So you think, sorry, I just heard out of the Councillor Stoner, you're suggesting that the local transit funding model discussion should be a different approach versus a resolution?
Thank you, through the chair. We had a resolution passed on this last year, and so I think it's as well as others in previous years. And so I think this continues to be an advocacy effort. I don't think we need a subsequent UBCM resolution. We have provincial support behind it. We just need to do our homework on following it.
Yep, that's fair. I think, and then it'll come to, I mean, that resolution there would be quite simple. So I do think a discussion, perhaps when we look at all our resolutions, see if that is something we want to put forward, or we can just agree at this point in time that with that advocacy approach. So the resolution would be that transit funding model should be provided on a 3-year cycle rather than a 1-year cycle. We have put this forward. I know that I've met with the minister on this, and so I think, is everyone okay with that approach? The other piece, okay. So then I'm trying to think my list here, the coastal strategy, the poverty, period poverty, the faith-based groups. I've got Councillor Greenlaw with Councillor French helping on the faith-based at least. The transit piece, I had to Councillor Hamilton. I'm going to cross that off. So we've got the SOFI centralization open data project with the province, Councillor Hamilton and Pettingill. The diking and related things. I'm going to take on Councillor Anderson's ECDEV industrial land piece. Councillor Pettingill, I called it welcome community, but that's as fully baked as we have it at this point, but I like that. Is there any, and then Councillor Stoner, and then if there's others that want to help with Councillor Pettingill, I'll leave it to sort of happen organically. Councillor French mentioned that, but I'll go to Councillor Stoner now, and then I'm looking to wrap this up if we can.
Yeah, I want to thank staff for putting some thought into the list provided. I agree that some of them are perhaps better addressed through meetings, but I do think that with staff's input and feedback, this is a process that is council-led and council priority for advocacy. And so I would like to pick up, and I'll work with you, Councillor French, if you'd like to, on the common law private covenants versus zoning bylaw and the land for affordable housing. I think that those warrant new or updated resolutions around. And I also would like to pick up the expansion of the active transportation infrastructure grant as a follow-on from New West's advocacy last year.
Okay, so on those items, is there any moving those into trying to sort of evolve those into resolutions? Is there anyone that has a challenge with any of those or wants to have anything reflected in that right away? Yeah, go ahead.
It's not really a challenge, just an observation about land for affordable housing. I mean, staff have been through this on two rounds of investigation, so I'm curious about what staff has in mind. At any rate, I'm keen to participate in that one, as well as the covenant and zoning bylaw matter. And the other thing on the item on the list is latecomer charges. Just for everyone's information, we submitted a resolution last year which was endorsed. I'm not aware, perhaps Councillor Stoner may be able to update, that we have any provincial response on that one. So that's a done deal. And it was following up from a previous resolution from another municipality 3 years ago, which was also endorsed. So it is still hanging as far as provincial response. We'll get an update. Thank you.
So, so I had Councillor Stoner, the covenant zoning interaction, the affordable housing, the land for affordable housing, and active transportation. I think those are all are important, and so I think we have a complete list now of the pieces we're going to work on, and then we'll have a discussion on the specific resolutions next time, and we can also talk about how the sheer volume we want to bring forward, if some of these pieces after some work do live better in advocacy or otherwise. And the pieces that we have suggested live in advocacy now as well, we'd entertain. If that switches through this sort of process of discovery, then we'd welcome that. Is there anything else on this topic? We're a little over time, which means we're eating into our lunch, but no other comments. So thank you for that. We've got some work ahead of us. Can you remind me of the next touch point for in council? Is it March? When was it?
February 25th, we come back to a committee of the whole.
Okay, so that's your so folks, that's not that far off, and that's your when we need to get this homework across the line. I see some discussion at the table. Anything to add there out of that?
The meeting is the 25th, but the briefing note and the draft resolution should be crafted before that, so council has an opportunity to review them all. So we've set February 14th as the deadline to have the drafts together. Thank you.
That's 10 days. Okay. So everyone's clear. Thank you for that point of clarity. We'll do what we can with that. I look forward to that discussion coming up. And yeah, so I'll be looking now for a motion to close. Councillor Stoner, second by Councillor Hamilton. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. We'll be in recess and resume in